back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week we've got guest Tom Schin. Tom is a master of culture and leadership in business. His background, like mine, spent quite a bit of time in talent acquisition, and he, like me, has escaped the staffing mines. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Jerry, thanks for having me first and foremost. I appreciate you giving me some time and inviting me to be part of your show. So a little bit about me. Almost 20 years in that recruiting world and loved it. Enjoyed almost all of it. I say almost, you know exactly what I mean. But it taught you a lot. You met a lot of great people. You experienced so much. I think one of the best things about that was the relationships. And as I grew a lot of those relationships, I saw some things that were missing in small, medium, and large size businesses. And for me, that was a focus on culture, engagement, and leadership development. And so you saw in large organizations, they would invest in training programs. They would invest in sending people to courses. And I knew this early in my pre-HR days, we would get sent to courses on this application or that application. I'm not going to state them because I'll date myself, but
I don't know what you're talking about, Tom.
I know. But nowadays, the more people I talk to, and everybody validates this, people get promoted because of how long they've been there and they were good at job X, not because they were prepared to lead. I can remember early in my career, I wasn't prepared for a role. I got turned down, and they had every reason to turn me down, and they should have, and they did. But as I look at different organizations now, people get promoted because they want to promote from internally, and that's what they've promised people that they would do. If the skill set's not there yet, it's got to be developed. And if you're not developing and throwing that person into that role, hoping they figure it out, you're doing them a disservice. You're doing all the people that are going to work for them a disservice, your customers, everybody. And so I formed up BuildBetterCulture about 5 years ago to help provide training, guidance, this leadership development component so that these managers, they're not bad people. Just no one ever taught them, hey, I should think about this a little differently. I should approach this in a slightly different tone than I had as, a technician would, etc. I've got to think about this not only strategically from a check 6 boxes, but how I interface with folks. It's not natural for everybody. We all can't be extroverts. So
can
that's
I
where
pause
this
you
whole
for a second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you said a ton that I want to unpack and not glaze over. So one thing is, it's interesting coming from a staffing background, an external recruitment background, because you learn two important things that are critical for business growth. Number one is, for whatever reason, and I'll never understand this as long as I live, most companies don't value recruitment. They think it's an easy job, almost unskilled labor. And the reason is because most of them haven't had to recruit outside of their professional networks. So they don't know what it's like to call somebody who's not interested, talk to them and get them engaged and all that stuff. That's one thing. The second thing, though, and it's just as prevalent, so many people, I won't say all, but I will say most, seem to think that leadership is a trait and characteristic, not a skill. You're either born a leader or you're not a leader. And there is nothing further from the truth than that. But I can't tell you how many times I've come across that, and folks are just objectively bad leaders, and they don't understand that there's a real support network out there to make them better. And then the final thing, and I'll turn the mic over, you just perfectly described what leads to the Peter Principle. Have you ever read about the Peter Principle in your travels?
Long time ago.
Yep. A million years ago. It's not new. So the Peter Principle, which comes from, I forget the full name of the study, but it's a Harvard study, states that if you stay in an organization for long enough, it's probable that you'll promote past your capabilities. So you'll just stay there long, do your job, do well, and then you'll get to a point where everything you touch turns to poop. And the reason is you're now beyond your capabilities. And you're outside of your element. And you see that most frequently with companies that don't do any type of internal leadership training, any type of internal development of folks. They just accept that person is now not performing, and they either deal with it or they bounce them out, when the reality is they were the problem.
Right. They think of, I think more often than not, they keep them because they think they're still good at 60% of this,
Right.
or they're really good with this, or they have this institutional knowledge that no one else can learn. When the reality is they learned it on the job. They learned it because
Yes.
you taught it to them just along the way. But now, and you'll like this from your staffing days, this candidate doesn't have this experience. Well, no one has this experience. You
Yeah.
learned it because you created this. How do you
Yeah.
expect anyone else to have this?
My favorite, even more than that, Tom, is when a person leaves who's been there for say 5 years, a significant amount of time, and they give you the job description that they hired that person with, but they're looking for the person that left.
Yep. Yep.
That's
I've had
my
that a
favorite rec
million
in the
times.
world to get.
Yep. Yep. And you have to bring them back to reality and say, okay, well, this is either this person or that person. It's not both, right? Not unless you're going to double the salary expectations and help me find this unicorn about because you taught them half the stuff. You created this database that you're using that you expect other people to know the same way. No.
Yeah.
If you want to bring in, you don't want to change the expectations, let's have a realistic conversation about those things. So yeah, the leader piece of it and the nature and the nurture conversation, things can be learned. People learn how to do things all the time. You look at the extreme, like I'll take athletes. They're an easier one to compare to. Somebody who, was a 400 hitter in high school becomes a 350 hitter in college because the competition gets better, gets to the minors. Now they're in the 280s. And by the time they hit the majors, they're at 240. Can they hit higher? Yeah. But there's outlying factors that come into it, and it's about how much work they're going to put into it. And some of them climb out of it. And the same is true in just about anything that you do. Can somebody who's vertically challenged reach the high shelf that a 6'7" person? No, but you give them a ladder. Yeah, absolutely. You got to put the right tools and the systems in place to help people succeed, and that's part of my shtick on providing leadership development for people even before they're in the leader seat.
Couldn't agree more. You and I talk about culture and leadership a lot because I suspect, honestly, because of the staffing background, because you see so many bad examples, you can't help but speak out about it. But when it comes to business growth, it's not a secret. The company only ascends to the level of its leadership skill. So it's such a self-serving thing for companies to invest in this area. And yet I don't see it done frequently enough. One would think, it's people invest in sales training, but they won't invest in the leaders who lead those salespeople.
It's really interesting that you bring that up. I was having a conversation recently with someone about framing up when people would ask me for interview advice, friends, family, people that you run into that were interviewing for this job. Hey, can you help me with my resume? Just critique this and that and the other. And one of the things I would always urge them to explain to me is what's important to you. Why are you leaving this job? Well, I don't get training. I don't get this. I don't get that. Okay. Make sure you weave in those questions into your question bank. You don't need to ask everything under the sun, but if learning and development, meaning growing as a professional, is important for you, and you're not asking these questions and you're taking the offer and then you're surprised 3 months down the line or a year down the line because this didn't happen, you have an opportunity to ask those questions. So what does training look like? Not only specifically to my task, but how do you help me become better at it? How do you help your leaders become better at leading? Do you? And what's the financial investment, right? If there's no financial investment, there's no skin in the game. Right? It's, hey, well, they're supposed to read stuff. They're supposed to find books. They can go to the library. We can go down a whole rabbit hole on that conversation. But if the companies aren't investing in it and you can't get that answer in an interview, it's not happening. And that's a thing to bring up to the table. Can we make it happen?
100%. There's two really important things I'd like to unpack that you just said. One, and I love that you're saying that. I give the exact same advice. I tell people in the 30 years I've been doing this, I've seen far more bad matches than I have bad candidates or bad companies. It's equal responsibility on the part of the company and the candidate to find a good match. And if you're not asking good questions, you're not doing your part.
That's it.
You're accepting a passive role in your life, which is almost always a losing proposition, unless you're luckier than I've ever been. And then the second part of what you said is we have to look at the fact that culture, the business culture, the norms have changed. Our grandparents worked for one company in their lives, maybe two. Our parents worked for two companies in their lives, maybe three. In the 90s, when I was, I left the Marines, I was looking for civilian jobs. You were expected to work 5 to 7 years in a job. Any less than that, you were a job hopper. In the 2000s, it was 3 to 5. In the 2010s, it was 3. And now it's common for tech folks to bounce about every 18 years. So in a world where people are looking at jobs as temporary, the perm job is not what it was when I was a kid. We really have to look at, number one, how do you perceive your talent? I always train my companies to look at them as long-term labor partners because they're going to come and go as their needs match. But number two, if with your hypothetical candidate earlier, if you're looking for a company to invest in you rather, and you're showing them a resume that you leave your job every 8, you have to ask yourself, in what time frame will they get that investment back? So again, I'm not candidate shaming. That's almost as ugly as victim shaming in today's society. But there are two parts to that equation. So I invest in my team. I put money in them. I train them. I get outside trainers. I train them myself. But I expect them to stay, and I create a culture that rewards them staying.
Right. So it's that adage of, what if I train them and they leave? Well, what if you train them and they stay? Right.
Yes.
That's the line that you need to lean in to. I've had this conversation multiple times where in some shape or form, this question comes out. It's not really a question, more of a statement. I don't want to be the stepping stone organization. They're going to come, save 12, 24 months and be gone. Yeah, that may happen. And it does happen. Your role, again, we're going to use QBQ language, John G. Miller. It's about personal accountability. And what we just talked about this, what you do in the environment you create, support, reinforce, put up with good, put up with bad, that culture that you've created and how people carry things out gives those employees reasons to stay or reasons to hightail it out of there. And I promise you said 18 months turnaround time for those folks. They've started looking 6 to 9 months before that. So yes, you really had 6 months of up ramp to get them trained to the point where they're actually functional, maybe 9 months. And instantly they're starting to look at the other way. And so are you really getting 100% of that productivity in an 18-month cycle? Probably not.
And right? Your first 3 months is ramp up. So even less than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But so it's upon the opportunity of the employer, the leader, the business owner, the manager to decide, all right, I realize I may lose a piece of these people percentage-wise from an odds standpoint to that typical attrition. My role is, how can I affect, what things can I do myself to make these people want to stay? How can I invite them, right? And work within your budget, work within your schemes. But every year, if you're doing goal setting, you have a budget, add to it, even if it's $1,500.
Yeah, you said something there that's critical that company owners need to understand. Your company has a culture. Anytime you have a group of people congregating, you have a culture. The question is, did you engineer a culture that will get you to your goals, or is it just the happenstance of the people you had in the room? Because if it's that one, it's possible it's good, but it's not super probable. The second thing that you said that I really want to touch on, so I teach the EFG leadership framework, engage, fulfill, and grow. So in my experience building teams over the last 20 of the 30 years, if a person feels heard and valued, if they like what they're doing, if they like what the company's doing and they're growing in their skills, they're not going anywhere. You incentivize them to stay. So I always teach, how to do that. But the E part is I don't know if it's the most important, but it's the part where the ball gets dropped the most often. In order for me to know what is going to make you happy, I need to ask you what you're trying to achieve. And I should be doing that in the interview, because if it's misaligned there, it's not mystically, magically going to align later on. If you want to go hard left and I want to go hard right, we're never going to meet.
Right. Well, you want to know, joining an organization, I have these other XYZ goals. How is that going to, maybe it's that you want to create a side hustle, right? Well, what does this company feel about side hustles? If it's a red flag in the interview to the interviewer, that probably isn't the right place for you. If they don't think that you can handle both, have a conversation about it. And if they're not willing to have that conversation, no need to hide it. That's not the place you want to be, right? And business owners, right? If you feel strongly that people can't handle both while doing this job, you're mistaken. I can't tell you, I don't have the stats behind these side hustles or side businesses that people have started up, especially during the last 4 years since COVID happened. The number of them has just blossomed out of control, and there's a lot of them. And a lot of people have this ability to do multiple things. In the job world, they can do multiple things. But today's audience, more than ever, is so much more about balance and doing the things that they love doing, their passion projects. versus being chained to a desk 60 hours a week. Yeah, 60 hours a week. Not the 40 that you say you're paying them for. It's the extra time that you're like, oh, well, everybody works a little extra. 20 hours isn't a little extra, right?
Yeah, it's a part-time job.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, that can go down another conversation.
Yeah, but that point, though, again, going back to the interview, when I'm training companies' internal recruitment teams, I always tell them you should be qualifying culture before you even talk about skills. Because if it's not a cultural match, if our missions, our value, our goals aren't in alignment, it's not ever going to work out. They're going to bounce in 90 days and be gone. Furthermore, you should be using that information to give to the manager. So when they start the onboarding process, two things happen. Number one, you've got all that data. That candidate now knows that you were actually listening and not being sold the bill of goods. Number two, you can start tying career development to their employee reviews. So number one, now the employee reviews aren't a slog. But number two, they can measure their growth as they're going. Everybody has an off day. Imagine you come into my office, Tom, you work for me, you're having a bad day, and we're going through your employee review. And I'm talking about the things that we achieved that you were excited about. You know what I mean? That's going to energize. That's going to help you to feel better. And I'll tell you, in a properly run organization, the EFG, it's the G that breaks the most often, because eventually I'm probably going to hit a point where I don't have your next step in the time that needed to. But if that G is breaking too early, that means you're over hiring. If you're looking for somebody who's 100% match, they've got nowhere to go. They've got nowhere to grow.
You've got to it's that lifelong learner piece, right? People, if you're really about people who are going to continue to grow, there's a mindset that goes with that. There are people who want to come in, work don't take this the wrong way, banker's hours, right?
Yep.
They get a bad rap. I know many fine bankers who put in a ton of effort. Yeah, the doors are only open 8 to 4. Everybody gets that. But they work hard, they play hard. But, if you're really about creating a welcoming environment where people are going to have balance, and that's what today's employees, the newer generations want. They want balance. They want to be able to go do what they want to do after the Fred Flintstone whistle goes off. It's a bird, I think, that goes off. They pull the tail and boop. They want to be able to have that balance to go do what's important to them. And that may be the side hustle. That may be skill development in another area that doesn't have anything to do with your business. And that's okay. So you can reinforce with them. I tell folks all the time, when you have somebody who has 10 goals and you can meet 60 of them, or you can help them get there, these other 40% have nothing to do with your business. If you're helping them get there, guess who's more loyal to you? Whether or not they stay. They're going to tell their friends. No-brainer. They're going to tell their neighbors. They're going to tell people who buy your product or service, right? They helped me get here. No, I didn't stay. They didn't have the role for me, right? I wanted to do marketing and you don't have marketing. Whatever the example is, right?
Yeah.
And so you have opportunities. Don't be so hogtied as a business leader, as a business owner, especially if you're scaling up in that startup realm, that today's situation is going to be tomorrow's reality. You don't know what the future is going to look like. Neither do they. You may just create the right opportunity. If I've had friends rewrite their entire job description, pitch it to their boss, and they create a job for them.
Yeah. And, you brought up side hustles and you brought up bankers' hours. I think it's important, again, in that more bad matches than bad candidates and bad companies mindset, that you're clear about what it's really like to work there. That, hey, look, we're a growing startup. Things here are crazy. In normal times, these are our hours. Leading up to a release, if there's a big problem, big opportunity, we do go all hands on deck. It won't be that way forever, but it's that way now. Now, that candidate might decide, that's not for me. But they'll make that decision in an educated way, because that same candidate who would say it's not for me and not move forward in the interview process is the same one that at best is going to be miserable and at worst is going to bounce when you need them the most during one of these moments.
Oh, so yeah. We saw that on the temporary side nonstop, where you had to really educate folks. And that was how we phrased it. Exactly. I want to educate us so you make a good decision. You know it's involved. If I get hesitation from you, I'm going to call you on it. And then you're going to say, no, it's not for me. And then 2 months later, like, can I have that job that you mentioned to me? No, you can't. And they ask why. You're like, I can do the job. I'm like, I didn't ask if you could do the job. You don't want to do that job. You made that very clear. And here's boom, 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 why you said that. And so collect that information. It's useful. Maybe someday you have that opportunity for that person and you'll have kept your notes and you'll remember that positive experience and that exchange. Like, it's okay to give.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you did. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's okay to give the truth on those answers.
Yeah.
You don't have to give them a runaround. People are, I mean, these are adults.
When I'm training recruiters and hiring managers, one of the hardest things to get them to understand is that just because a person can do the job doesn't mean that they will do the job. So I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation again with a manager or with the recruiter that yes, the person has 10 years experience. Yes, they could do this job in their sleep. The problem is it will put them to sleep and they're going to leave in 2 months. You are a placeholder, a paycheck. This job is them 3 years ago. And then, it's the hardest thing to teach. But we're getting hung up on recruiting. So talk to me. It's hard not to, it starts at the beginning. It starts at the beginning. So when you're working with a new company, what types of things do you look for? How do you assess where they're at? Or is your service pretty productized? How does that work?
No, it's very, very tailored to where somebody is. So, the easier ones are where somebody knows, hey, I've got somebody who has some skill gaps or experience gaps, and they've not run into this before. I need them to have better communication skills, better empathize with their employees, have better language around that, better habits around that. So the easy one, right? You walk into a manager's office, they're in their phone or in their screen. They don't even look up. Right? They're like, yeah, just give me a second. Or they put their hand up, the stop sign motion. Let me finish the thought. And then they never look up. They're like, okay, what can I help you with? And they're not even looking at you.
Yeah.
That employee knows that they're not valuable. Yeah. But you teach that manager, I've had a couple of these where I'll tell them, move your monitor away from, you looking out the door. Put it off to the side so that way when somebody walks in your office, if you're in office, you're looking at them. Right? And if you're hybrid or remote, all right, if you're having conversations with folks, take your hands away from the keyboard and put your phone off where you can't reach it. If that's out of reach, you're not grabbing for it the minute it buzzes. Or put it on airplane mode. Employees want your undivided attention, regardless of what industry, how big your organization is. And if you're distracted, employees note it. And they know that it matters. My boss never listens to me. Oh, they just do this. You do it once, you can get away with it. Twice, that's about the limit.
Yeah, right? It's interesting you say that because it's an old cliche for a reason. You need to be efficient with things and effective with people. Nobody likes to feel like they're number 3 of 7 in a multitask list for you.
And they don't want to feel like a number.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly correct. And the important thing about leadership relationships, I think a lot of leaders miss, is that, and I'm 150% stealing this from Dr. Stephen Covey, by the way, full disclosure, not me, it's all him. But every time you interact with somebody, it's like a deposit or withdrawal from a bank account. So when I'm working with you and I'm building you and I'm doing positive things, I'm making deposits. When I have to have a tough conversation with you or when I make a mistake like you just described, I'm withdrawing from that account. Once you hit 0 on that account, you can't take anymore.
No.
And unfortunately, something about human nature, deposits are almost always smaller than withdrawals, even in the same comparable thing. So I can do 10 rights and 2 wrongs and I've lost you.
Yeah. Well, you can tie in holiday themed movies like It's a Wonderful Life and George Baileyisms with the Bedford Bank. I can't remember the name of it, but Bedford Falls. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. Those little deposits, it's kind of like customer service reviews. It takes 10 positive reviews to outweigh the negative one. Now you see it live with Google reviews and so on and so forth. Like you get a 1-star review from somebody, you're begging all your friends and everybody that you hold dear, I need a bunch of 5-star reviews. Can you guys go help me out and write this? Anyway, down a rabbit hole we go. But that positive impact, and that goes back to the value of effective communication in a leadership role. People who aren't as gregarious and effusive about conversation like us extroverts, well, you and I, we agree. We can talk to anybody. It doesn't matter if it's in a video game arcade, at the mall, or
I'm that dude in the checkout line. I'm that guy.
Everybody, right? And you're talking to the checkout person that looks miserable and you're trying to cheer him up. Little sarcastic joke, this and that and the other. But all those little moments are opportunities, and not everybody realizes that. That notion that, oh, this should make sense to them. No, it's not natural for them. They haven't had to experience. No one's ever taught them. No one's ever pointed this out. And so these are a lot of the things that I dive into conversations with. And you talk about framework and kind of figuring out where a business is. Do they need help? Well, it's recognizing, here are the things that we're really good at. Here are where I think we struggle with. From there, it's a lot of little focus group conversations, 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 3-on-1, figure out where does this company do well? Where do they fall short? Right. And this isn't a paint a picture to make you kind of throw the company and the organization under the bus. It's to figure out where are our gaps? Where can we get a little better and plan that out over the course of the year? First quarter, it's this. Second quarter, it's that. Third quarter, it's this. Fourth quarter, it's that. And so you have an opportunity to sort of build a long range plan around culture, engagement, communication, building a fabric that you say in your values, you do these things, but are you really? No, you're getting back to old tasks, old habits, because they're hard to break.
I love it. Let me ask you this, Tom. If you could give one piece of advice to any early stage leader, what would that advice be, do you think?
Yeah, I would say this is sort of a fork in the road kind of answer. The people you have right now may be the people that you have in 10 years. Whether you decide to hang on to the business, get it to a certain point and sell it, or whatever that situation is. The 5 or 10 people you have today, they may be getting you to where you need to be at the next goal mark, but they may not necessarily be that long-term fit for that people leadership role. Maybe they're really good on one aspect of your business, maybe the creative element, but that communication piece, they can handle 1 or 2 people. But when you have a department of 10 or multiple departments coming at you, when you've gotten to 50 or 100 people, that's a whole different world. Recognize that up front. Recognize people's strengths and abilities now. And if you want to scale with them, give them the training, the time, the investment. Some of that's something outside the organization, right? We talked about that. But build that into the plan. Year 1, we're going to do this. Year 2, when we hit this head count, we're going to get you trained on this, right? And we're going to help you practice it. Don't just send them for training. Help them practice it. Give them role-playing partners, mentors inside the organization, from your personal network, from professional associations. Who has the skills that can teach them? Yeah, they might be competitors, or they might be somebody that might try to steal that person. If you're doing what you're supposed to, that person's going to want to stay with you. And you got to take that risk. It's kind of like you've got 3 of a kind in a poker hand where, at the point where the flop is laid down, you see it, stay in that hand, regardless of how everyone else is betting. Because you want to see what the next card's going to look like. You may not stay all the way through, but it's one of those things that plan for that. The people that you have may need further development, and build a budget.
I couldn't agree more. And the thing about that, we alluded throughout this whole conversation that people's need to grow and to change. Organizations do as well. So that person who is a great fit for you, number 1, they might have grown this way while your company grew another. But number 2, your organization simply may not be what it was. And if you're growing, I'm here to tell you it's not. A $5 million company in most industries is basically a club. You barely have to run it in a professional way. A $20 million company needs real and significant reporting systems and structures in order to be able to operate. Those are 2 wildly different entities. And a $50 million company needs heads of departments and executive leadership and professional management. It's a different animal. And the people that thrive in one environment rarely thrive in the others.
It's tough. And I think being aware of that, and for me, it's all about having those conversations up front. Today, This is where I'm at. I hope there's a future here for you, and I will invest in you, right? And I will help in it. And if that's not the case, I will help you find that next piece. But I want to be clear as day here that today's situation is not where we're going to be in 5 years. And I want people to know that, so that I'm not pulling the wool over their eyes or promising something that's not there. That gets you more credit. Again, to that candidate matching piece, that person knows and has the choice to take that risk. Eyes wide open.
100%. I tell people in every interview for an internal hire that I'm going to expect more of them than other people they've worked with in the past. But my commitment to them is that they will leave my organization better business people than they joined. If that excites them, they're in the right place. If it doesn't, let's part friends now.
Right. No harm, no foul, right? You're not making lies up. It's not like you're being a jerk. You're just setting expectations. It's kind of like Sandler's upfront contracting. Here's what I'm looking at. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know if my long range plans is 5 years out, 7 years out, 10 years out. But I will tell you, lifelong, life cycle wise, things are going to change. And here's the areas you're really strong at that I need today, and I will need for the next 2 or 3 years. Then it's going to evolve, and we'll have conversations yearly about what this looks like, so we can plan for it. So it's not a surprise to anybody. It's like performance reviews. How stupid
Yes.
are they? Another conversation.
Yeah, I think performance. This might be a good one because we're not in complete alignment. I think performance reviews are fine if they're done right. The problem is
Fair.
they very rarely are.
Fair.
But that feels like a good exit side for us. So let me say this. We'll save that for our next conversation, and maybe our faithful audience can watch us duke it out.
Yeah.
So Tom, if people want to learn more about you and about your company's services, how can they reach you? How can they find you?
First place to find me is BuildBetterCulture.com. 3 words, no spaces. I spend a lot of time putting information out on LinkedIn, so I am really easy to find there. If you want to use Google, Google will tell you where I live. That's not hard to find, but I try to put out useful information and nuggets. So my website, BuildBetterCulture.com, and LinkedIn are the 2 easiest places to find me and connect with me and have some conversations. Scope me out, do your homework. You may like me, you may not. I can't tell you that.
Yep. Much like the rest of this conversation, figure it out early on. In all seriousness, maybe Tom isn't your cup of tea. Figure it out now, but give him a shot. Check it out. And for all of you folks that have listened to the show for a long time, you know all the info that Tom shared in his website, his LinkedIn profile, all that stuff will be in the show notes. So you don't need to crash your cars trying to write it down now. Tom, I'd like to thank you again for being on the show. You've been awesome. And I truly would love to have you on again.
Jerry, can't thank you enough for having me on. This is a great conversation. So many different rabbit holes to go chasing down, but I appreciate you having me on. And listeners, thanks for bearing with me, being part of Jerry's fantastic show.
No, thanks for being on. Take care. And as always, audience, between now and next week, be awesome and continue to build incredible businesses.